Hey, hi, hello. Welcome to Diana Emerson. Today we're listening to This Killer Murdered 12 Women and His 2-month-old baby.
California.
Evil Killer.
The half-naked corpse of a woman was found in a grapefruit orchard on the outskirts of the city by two local workers.
We didn't know who she was, but we lift up her shirt, and right in the middle of her chest were four very distinct stab wounds.
Forensic scientists later identified the woman as 35-year-old sex worker Carol Miller. Her stab wounds were a calling card of the so-called Riverside prostitute killer who'd already slain 3 women. 39-year-old Bill Suff would go on to take another 9 victims.
I would tell girls, stay off the streets for a while. It's not safe. There is a serial murderer out there.
But by day, Suff was a model employee for the local county.
He was very friendly. He was the guy next door. He was a chameleon. He could become this monster and brutalize these women horribly.
The Jekyll and Hyde killer even attacked his own children.
I was not wanting to believe that he would kill our child. There's no rhyme or reason for it.
Suff beat his 2-month-old daughter to death. He brutally killed and mutilated 12 women. He spread fear across the county of Riverside, making Bill Suff one of the world's most evil killers. The 23rd of December 1991, Riverside, California. A workman made a shocking discovery. He found the body of 39-year-old Eleanor Casales lying in orange groves. She'd been strangled, stabbed and mutilated, and was the 13th victim of the man who'd later become known as the Riverside prostitute killer.
When we look at this particular murder, it was very violent. And if we look at what he did with the victim's breast, he mutilated it and he threw it some 40 feet away, just discarding this woman's body part like it's trash. And I think that's how he saw these victims.
In an act of bravado, the killer dumped Eleanor's body just a block away from the Riverside Police Department. Local detective Christine Keir Sheffield had warned Eleanor about a serial murderer on the loose only days earlier.
When we saw Eleanor, I was just like, oh my God. And we just had this talk. And I knew she had little children. You fight back your emotions and say, we're going to get this stopped.
Knowing a serial killer was on the rampage shocked the county of Riverside.
The fear was rampant. It affected people's willingness to go out at night and just walk in their neighborhoods. And the papers played up to that. There was a great deal of building pressure on us, law enforcement, to find this individual.
This killer's story begins on the 20th of August 1950. William Lester Suff was born in Torrance, California.
From the outside, his family did appear to be very traditional. He was the eldest of 5 siblings. But there was an incredibly abusive relationship that went on between Suff's parents. And when a child grows up in an environment like this, they learn violence is a way of getting what you want. Violence is a way of maintaining feelings of control. And those are very toxic things, but they take root.
His mother, Elizabeth, was domineering, overbearing. His father, William, rather remote. I'm not suggesting for a moment that there was abuse, but there was certainly very poor male role model anywhere around.
At the age of 16, Suff's father walked out on the family, and his mother was left bringing up 5 children on her own. Suff had to work part-time to support his family, who were in dire straits.
Well, Seth had to take on quite a considerable role looking after his siblings. He had a lot of responsibility. He was essentially an adult in this house. And I think that impacted upon his own development to make him quite an isolated and quite a solitary individual.
Elizabeth starts up another relationship with a man she was eventually to go on and marry. Now, he was the opposite, if you like, of Saf's father. He was firm, disciplinarian, very tough, I think, on Saf.
At school, young Saf was an unremarkable student, but he held his own amongst his peers, achieving average grades. He also developed an interest in music and learned to play the trumpet.
He was in the high school marching band. As a matter of fact, in his senior year in high school, his high school marching band had been selected to participate in the Rose Parade, which is quite an accomplishment.
It was here, playing with his band, that the 18-year-old Saf met his first love, Terrell, who was just 15.
Well, me and my friends from school, we went to the game, and Bill was there, and he was kind of cute, and so naturally we all flirted. At the time, I was infatuated. I thought he was a cute guy. He asked me for my phone number, and I gave it to him. And then I heard from him a couple months later he was going into the Air Force.
Saf wrote to Terrell from his Air Force base in Texas, where he was training to be a medic. And just over a year later, in May 1969, he asked for her hand in marriage. But Terrell had suffered a devastating event.
I had been raped, got pregnant, and said, no, I can't marry you. Circumstances. And told him what happened, and he says, well, I want to marry you anyway. So we did.
Although Saf had accepted that Terrell had been raped and that she was carrying the child, ironically, he didn't accept the child.
Saf lied and told Terrell that the Air Force didn't allow children to live at the base. She was forced to leave the baby with Saf's mother and stepfather in California and make the move to join him in Texas alone.
For him, it was an opportunity to exert control over somebody else. Terrell was someone who was quite vulnerable, who had been through quite a lot. So I think he took advantage of that situation.
Pretty much his behavior started changing when I moved to Texas, because then he felt like he had complete control over me. He started to get physical. That was only 6 months in.
In early winter 1970, Saf was discharged from the Air Force. The following November, the couple had their first child, William Jr.
Saf himself at this point is 21, a new young father, struggling to realise what being a father means. I think fatherhood was a dreadful shock to him.
The couple stayed in Texas, but Saf drifted from job to job until he found work as a parking attendant. Even then, he was fired for stealing a client's car. So Terrell had to work in a restaurant to pay their bills.
So when he loses his job and Terrell becomes the main breadwinner, this causes quite a lot of conflict in him because it compromises those feelings of control that he has over this family. Seth has some very fixed views about men and women. Men should be breadwinners, women should be caregivers. So I think this causes quite a lot of conflict for him.
In July 1973, the couple had their second child, a daughter called Dejanay, affectionately known as Dee Dee. Whilst Terrell went out to work, the volatile Saf was left at home alone with Dee Dee, and their newborn bore the brunt of his frustrations.
When somebody's abusive and they're used to getting what they want through being violent, and they try and use that tactic on a baby, it doesn't work in the same way that it would work on an adult. If anything, it's going to make the baby cry more, it's going to make them scream more, and this is just a really toxic environment to bring a child into.
But soon the angry and possessive Bill Saf would break into a rage that would spiral out of control. Before long, the little life he held in his hands would be in mortal danger. On the 25th of September, Terrell received some alarming news about their 2-month-old baby.
Saf rings his wife at work and says you must come home at once because Dee Dee's not breathing. Terrell rushes home to discover that her newborn daughter is indeed not breathing.
When we look at the abuse that their daughter was subject to, it is really horrendous. Broken ribs, broken wrists, cigarette burns. It was really awful.
Suff tries to explain her injuries by saying that his son, William Jr., had been too aggressive in hugging and kissing her. Bizarre, I would have said, because I don't think any toddler is capable of inflicting those kinds of injuries. But that was Suff's story.
I was not wanting to believe that he would kill our child. And when he was arrested, I was trying to still work in my mind how I could have done it and why. There was no rhyme or reason for it.
When the doctors examined Dee Dee, they also found evidence of old injuries, which suggested she'd been abused over a period of time. Terrell's world was turned upside down even further when she too was arrested on charges of murder. Their son was taken into care, and on the 11th of April 1974, both parents were sentenced to 70 years for killing their daughter.
I didn't have my son. I'd lost my daughter. And I really had nothing. I was just devastated, destroyed. And I wasn't sure how I was going to actually make it through.
Treat yourself to the best gift in history this holiday season. Enjoy unlimited access to award-winning podcasts and thousands of hours of original history documentaries released weekly.
Terrell was granted an appeal hearing. The court was not satisfied with the evidence against Terrell and exonerated her.
I walked outside the courtroom and just screamed. Because now I can try to move on. And I immediately started divorce proceedings. And it was one of the best days of my life.
Meanwhile, her ever-manipulative ex-husband was making his own plans for an early release.
When Suff's in prison, he demonstrates the kind of behaviour that officials want to see. He's compliant. He appears to be someone trying to better himself.
He volunteered for the prison library. He took 2 degrees, caused no trouble whatever. Suff is such a model prisoner that he serves only 10 years for his sentence and is released in 1984.
On the 6th of March, 33-year-old Suff was awarded parole. He moved back to California and found a job in the county of Riverside selling Greyhound bus tickets.
He appeared to be a real pillar of the community, and it diverts attention away from him. He blends in. He's the average Joe.
In October 1986, Suff got a new job as a supply clerk for Riverside County. He started dating a teacher called Bonnie and moved in with her to help care for her elderly grandmother.
He's effectively creating the persona, the quiet man who doesn't mind helping, very ordinary, but within something quite different was happening.
People at work loved him. He was good to everybody on the outside. He had this facade going on about him that you could trust him, that he was a kind and giving person, but at the same time had that secret devil within him.
Suff split up from his girlfriend Bonnie after he admitted stealing money from her grandmother. He often spent nights cruising the local red light districts looking for casual sex. He developed a hatred for the women he saw on the streets.
I think he reserved a particular distaste for sex workers because he saw them as less than women. He saw them as women who weren't fulfilling the roles of the caregiver and the nurturer. And he had some very rigid ideas about who women are and how they should behave.
Soon this seething resentment would escalate. In January 1989, 38-year-old Suff was driving his van down Main Street in Lake Elsinore when he spotted a young woman called Rhonda Jetmore. They agreed on $20 for sex, and she demands the money up front.
It is extremely dark. Saf hands her the bill, and she switches the flashlight on to look at it. And instead of it being a $20 bill, it's a $1 bill. Now, she's furious. I'm not doing this for a dollar bill. She is angry. Saf launches himself at her in an attempt to begin to strangle her.
Rhonda fought back, smashing Saf around the head with her flashlight and made her escape.
I think it taught Saf something very specific. Never let them survive. If you attack them, they must be killed. You cannot afford to have another Rhonda.
6 months later, on the 26th of June 1989, single mother Kimberly Little was soliciting sex along Main Street. Saf was one of her regular clients. He picked her up.
Put her into his van, take her to an isolated spot, rape her, stab her, strangle her, and he put some of his clothes on her. He demonstrated an extraordinary lack of DNA awareness. He left semen at the scene. He left pubic hair at the scene.
She was clothed, and she was wearing a man's Western-style shirt. She had pants on, but she had a long blue bath towel that covered her. Now, this was significant to the profiler because he felt that the suspect knew her. There was a sign or an indication of remorse. He couldn't look at her. He covered her. He left her there.
Any remorse Saf may have felt soon disappeared. 6 months later, on the 12th of December 1989, Saf returned to Lake Elsinore's red light district again. He picked up 23-year-old Tina Leal, then strangled and stabbed her. She was dumped off a quiet road in nearby Paris, and a couple discovered her body the following day.
She was wearing men's clothing. The suspect had mutilated her body, but the evidence showed that she was dressed after she was killed.
We noticed that she had very distinct stab marks towards the middle of her chest. Not the typical kind of stab marks that you would see when somebody's in a rage. These were very controlled, very clean-looking stab marks that would indicate somebody had control over their senses and their emotions at the time.
It wasn't until the autopsy later that day that detectives discovered the true horror of Saf's final act of humiliation against his victim.
The pathologist discovered that a 95-watt light bulb had been inserted into her vaginal vault. Now, according to the pathologist, he felt that the suspect had to take quite a bit of time with her because the light bulb was intact. It hadn't broken.
With at least 2 victims under his belt now, Saf was becoming bolder. Just over 1 month later, on the 18th of January 1990, he struck again, strangling another sex worker, Darla Ferguson, after sex.
Her body was found in a remote area along a dirt road just outside of Lake Elsinore. And the unique thing with Darla Ferguson was that she was nude, she was strangled just like the other victims, but her upper torso was covered in a very large black bag, a trash bag, and it was tied at the waist.
We did not look at the first murders as being connected at all. They were like independent events that happened. The only similarity that we knew at the time, they were in the Elsinore area, and they were female prostitutes.
But soon a pattern would begin to emerge for investigators. Just over 2 weeks later, on the 6th of February, Saf had identified a hunting ground closer to home. He picked up 35-year-old Carol Miller from Riverside's red light district, University Avenue. He stabbed and strangled her, then dumped her in a grapefruit orchard on the outskirts of the city. She was discovered 2 days later by agricultural workers.
Well, I went out to the Carol Miller scene, and she was naked except that she had her shirt over her face. Next to her was a partially eaten and peeled grapefruit. And we lift up her shirt, and Right in the middle of her chest were 4 very distinct stab wounds. I was aware of the Tina Leal case, where she also had 4 distinct stab wounds that seemed to be very deliberate. Carol Miller had the same, and that was atypical. It's just not what we normally see.
Steve Sokowski was also drawn to something else that the killer's van had left at the scene.
There were hundreds of feet of tire tracks, so we took literally hundreds and hundreds of pictures to document them, see if they matched anything else.
Questions were now starting to be asked about whether this series of killings could in fact be linked.
Tina Leal, Darla Ferguson, and Carol Miller. They had occurred in consecutive months. So we didn't really know what was going to happen, and we didn't know if we were going to expect another case. So it's like, did we have a serial killer? So now the object was, well, let's analyze the evidence and see what we can come up with.
Whilst investigators pored over the evidence he left behind, serial killer Suf had made his mark, killing the sex workers he so despised. Despite having killed at least 4 sex workers, his rampage had only just begun. At night, Suf stalked the streets in his van looking for his next victim. But by day, the local county clerk was a pillar of the community.
Riverside County was promoting a rideshare program to conserve energy, and interestingly enough, Mr. Suf was the poster boy for the program. He was on the front page of the newsletter, and the headline said, "Take a ride with Bill," and he was standing next to his van that he had kidnapped and murdered and assaulted all these women in.
Things were going well for Suf. Not only was he a model employee, he'd started a new relationship.
He meets Cheryl, and there's got to be at least, I would say 20 years difference in their age.
She was only a teenager. Abusive and controlling men tend to target younger women because they are easier to manipulate, they're easier to isolate, they're easier to shape and mould and to chip away at their sense of identity.
Whirlwind romance. He rushes her off to Las Vegas, they get married. She doesn't really know anything about him. She's a child compared to this mature adult who also happens to be a serial killer. Cheryl becomes pregnant.
Despite being a newlywed, Suf could not suppress his need to kill. So he came up with a clever ruse to tell his new and expectant wife.
He was telling her that he did the disaster preparedness program for the county of Riverside, and that's why he was out late till 1 or 2 in the morning. He had disaster preparedness pamphlets. I don't know if he ever passed any of them out, but he convinced her that that's what he was doing at nighttime.
Just 7 months after getting married, Suf was looking for his next victim. On the 30th of October, he returned to University Avenue in the city of Riverside, where he picked up 33-year-old Cheryl Coker. After sex, he strangled her, then placed her body into a dumpster. She was Suf's 5th victim, and in his final depraved act, he sliced off her right breast.
He's making judgments about them as women because breasts are obviously a part of nurturing children, and I think this is perhaps his way of saying these women, in my opinion, are not fit to be mothers. They are not fit to be women.
From where the body was located, there was an embankment, and when he sliced her breast off, he tossed it like a frisbee that went all the way up the embankment on the top up there. So that was rather unusual.
Once again, he leaves DNA and fibre evidence behind. He's not grown any more aware of forensic proof than he was before.
Just 7 weeks later, on the 21st of December, another sex worker, Susan Sternfeld, was found strangled in a dumpster close to the location of the previous killing.
When you're starting to find women that are placed in dumpster areas, you start to do a little bit of a tie-in. So in my mind, I'm thinking that there's somebody out there that feels that these women are nothing more than trash. And so we're going to treat them like trash. After we kill them, we're going to dump them in the trash.
Now Suf, the prostitute hater, was picking up pace with his murders. Barely a month later, on the 18th of January 1991, 42-year-old Kathy Puckett vanished whilst working University Avenue in Riverside. She was found strangled the next day by a motorist at the side of a dirt road 30 miles away. Forensic scientist Steve Sikowski attended the scene and made an important discovery.
I saw dozens of tire tracks, and I noticed that there was one that struck a familiar chord to some of the tire tracks in the Carol Miller case. We have finally some physical evidence that would link at least two of the cases. That was the first time that we now had some evidence forensically that said we've got a serial killer going here.
When Steve Sikowski started looking for other evidence linking the spate of sex worker killings, his suspicions were confirmed.
I started looking at all the trace evidence, the fibers, and saw some commonalities. I saw fibers that were gray in color from one victim to the next. And so we were starting to build up some idea that, in fact, we do have a series going on, a serial killer. We had to put a stop to it.
To us, it was not that they were prostitutes. It was they were human beings being killed. Women are being killed and dumped in places all over the place. So we need to make a tie-in here somehow.
Now that there was conclusive evidence confirming that a serial killer was on the loose, a task force was created linking the various law enforcement agencies investigating the killings in both Riverside and Lake Elsinore. They put out posters appealing for locals to come forward with any relevant information and offering a reward of $11,000. By the 27th of April, they had an 8th case of a dead sex worker on their hands, 24-year-old Sherry Pacer. For the forensic team, gathering evidence at this crime scene proved much more difficult.
We were in the process of looking at the body to see if there were any fibers on it. We already saw a shoe print, and the sprinkler system came on. It was just a small little garden area behind the bowling alley. We're standing on top of literally sprinklers coming up on us to keep the water off the body, and yelling, "Adam, shut the sprinkler system on."
With the sprinklers washing away potential evidence, it reduced the amount of information forensics could gather. However, they did find traces of semen on Sherry's body. Despite having a heavily pregnant wife, Cheryl, at home, on the 3rd of July, Suf struck again, taking his next victim, 37-year-old Sherry Latham.
The whole task force is starting to feel pressured because we have these bodies that are appearing in. I didn't feel any closer to identifying or providing that kind of information to catch the guy.
3 weeks later, Suf became a father once again when Cheryl gave birth to their daughter. Whilst he was forced to spend some time at home, the task force were making every effort to close in on him.
One of the deputies was assigned to try and identify some shoe impressions that were left at several of the scenes. So what he did is he took a photograph of the shoe impression, and it was blown up to a 1-to-1 ratio, which means it's the actual size of the impression. What that deputy did is he went to all the different shoe stores, picking up shoes, looking at the bottom, at their soles, to try and find the same pattern. And after many hours, he was successful. He found that shoe. So now we had a shoe identified, and we have a shoe size identified.
Meanwhile, forensic scientist Steve Sikowski's hard work had started to pay off. He'd been analysing the tyre marks found at the scenes of Carol Miller and Kathy Puckett's killings, and he too had made a breakthrough.
I was able to identify what kind of tire it was. It was an Armstrong Ultra Track. It had a very unique kind of tread design or pattern. And so I would take this picture with me wherever I would go. I remember one time I went to a restaurant with my dad and my two youngest kids, and I'd be looking at the cars in the parking lot to see if I found a similar tread design. They're going, Dad, what are you doing?
The task force was so determined to catch this killer that many were unable to leave their work at the office.
Many times I would take my casebook home and lay it out on the bed and say, what are we missing? Is this somebody that knows these girls? Is it somebody that works down here? Is it somebody coming in from out of town? And it was rather disturbing to me, to say the least. So I started putting all my effort into it.
But an even bigger break would come for the task force on the 15th of August. At 10 p.m., serial killer Bill Suff was once again cruising Riverside's red light district.
Suff goes out searching for prey again and comes across a young woman called Kelly Whitecloud. She is spirited and not one to suffer fools gladly. They make a deal.
She got in his van and went with him to McDonald's because she wanted him to buy her a hamburger.
Once they got back in his van, Suff said he wanted to take Kelly out to nearby orchards for sex, but she refused. An argument broke out.
She felt uneasy, and so ultimately when they drove out of the McDonald's parking lot, she bolted from the van and ran away.
As Kelly recovered from her encounter with Suff, she witnessed him pick up her friend and fellow sex worker Kelly Hammond further down University Avenue.
Whitecloud is shouting to her down the street, "Don't get in the van, don't get in." Hammond ignores it, gets into the van, and becomes Suff's next victim.
Suff had sex with Kelly in the back of his van and then strangled her with a ligature.
He dumped her nude body in an alleyway and posed it with her legs in the air, which meant, almost for the first time in his spree, that she was found relatively quickly. Her body was still warm when it was discovered.
Suff had taken the lives of at least 9 sex workers, but a witness had seen the predator on the prowl. The net would soon close in on the killer. On the 16th of August, an office worker found Kelly Hammond's body and called the police. Detective Christine Keir Sheffield had previously gone undercover as a local sex worker, so she investigated the latest murder using her contacts on the street.
I knew, because I had a rapport with the girls, that Kelly Hammond was a good friend of Kelly Whitecloud's. So I went to University Avenue, and I looked for Kelly Whitecloud, and I found her. I said, "Get in the car, Kelly." And I asked her, "When's the last time you saw Kelly Hammond?" She goes, "Oh, I saw her last night. Why?" And I said, "Well, I'm going to tell you this." I go, "Kelly was murdered last night." And so she, of course, became hysterical, was crying.
Kelly told Detective Keir Sheffield about her altercation with the client in the van and how the same man had picked up her friend. With this breakthrough of finally finding a witness, the task force rushed in a forensic artist to create a sketch of the suspect.
And Kelly told her he's a white guy with a chubby face, he's wearing glasses, and she really gave an awesome description. I was ecstatic. I just felt that we were getting closer now. We were getting closer. We had something.
So we now have a drawing of a suspect. We have the type of vehicle and color that he was driving. We're excited about this. This is the best type of information that you could hope for.
By now, the police had drawn up a profile of their serial killer. Detective Keir Sheffield was asked by her superiors to update them on the investigation.
I said, this guy, he starts off, he's only doing white females. And now we're getting Hispanic females. But he's never done an African-American female. The following day, my chief of police decided to do a press release. And he put the information out. And it came out in the newspaper.
So on the 12th of September, Suff had a sinister surprise in store. He picked up a black sex worker, 30-year-old Catherine McDonald, stabbed and strangled her, then left her on a deserted building site 40 miles south in Lake Elsinore.
I think that he was thumbing his nose at us saying, you don't know what I like. You can't guess who I'm going to do next. And I'm a free man out here. I think he was taunting us.
Suff repeated many of the hallmarks he used in his previous killings, so that the police could be in no doubt as to whose handiwork this was. But in his haste to show off, he also unwittingly left clues.
Where Catherine McDonald was laid was an area that had a lot of fresh dirt, which is very conducive to cars driving over it and leaving very good tire track impressions. Forensically, there was a lot of information just in the tire tracks and shoe prints.
What investigators didn't realize was that on the very same day their serial killer was hiding in plain sight. Two newly appointed members of the task force were visiting the council warehouse Suff worked at to collect new office furniture when their pagers went off.
They asked Bill Suff if they could use his telephone to call dispatch, and Bill Suff said sure. And while Bill Suff was nearby watching them, these investigators were taking down notes on the very body, on the very person, the victim, that he had killed the day before. You can just imagine the euphoria that he felt, the feeling that he was smarter than us, and we had no idea that it was him.
Whilst the smug killer relished watching the police run around in circles, trying to work out who was behind the slayings, at home things were beginning to slip. Suff was once again struggling with being a father.
So history almost repeats itself here, and this is a very toxic, a very dangerous environment into which to bring a child, because he doesn't possess those feelings of attachment and warmth and love that make most fathers put the needs of their child first.
Cheryl threatened to leave Suff because of the abuse he'd subjected their daughter to. But manipulative as ever, he asked for one more chance to change his ways, and she decided to stay.
And Bill was pleading with Cheryl to get back with him. He was making all kinds of promises. They had gotten an apartment now in the city of Colton, and she decided to go back with him. When she did, in her own way of offering him a present, she had bought a pair of Converse shoes for him for Christmas. And she had given him those shoes as an early Christmas present.
But there was no sign of Suff, the serial killer, stopping. 7 weeks later, on the 30th of October, he took his 11th known victim, 35-year-old sex worker Delia Zamora. Then, barely 2 months later, on the 23rd of December, Suff lured 39-year-old Eleanor Casares into his van in broad daylight.
He's becoming incredibly brazen, that the fear of getting caught does not seem to be something that is on his radar. He's really engaging in some quite risky behaviour.
Suff killed Eleanor and took her to an orange grove just a street away from the Riverside police station. He left her body there to taunt the task force investigators.
Yet again, strangulation, yet again, dumped, and now part of the signature, her breast is cut off.
Just 2 hours later, her body was found by an orchard worker, and the police were called to the scene. Once again, though, Suff slipped up, leaving footprints and tire tracks in the dirt. He'd been wearing the new shoes Cheryl had given him as a gift.
I was able to identify that these are Converse tennis shoes, because that's how good the impression was. And from there, I was able to tell that there were 3 different types of tires on this vehicle, and where those tires were located, where the different types were.
Having known Eleanor personally, this was a particularly difficult time for Detective Keir Sheffield.
I wanted to make sure that I was there with the coroner when he told the mother and the children. And the brothers were absolutely out of their minds. They wanted to grab guns and hit the streets. And I said, please don't. I said, I considered Eleanor a friend. So I'm asking you, just let us handle this for the next few weeks and let's see what we can do.
Detective Keir Sheffield was determined to get the extra resources necessary to finally get this killer off her streets.
Had it been college students, there'd have been at least 100 detectives on this case. All power would have been out there on that. I just felt it was a slap in the face because it's like saying, well, okay, it's just prostitutes, so we'll give it our best shot, but we're not going to give it 100%. And I was absolutely livid. I went to the chief and I said, listen, here's what we need to do.
Her chief agreed to launch a week-long intensive police operation in Riverside's red light district.
We decided to call it Operation Apprehension. I put a picture of the suspect, and I said he will be on University Avenue. If you see this individual and he's trying to pick up a prostitute, stop him.
On the 9th of January 1992, the operation paid off. A police motorcyclist followed Suff's van down University Avenue. A short while later, he witnessed the vehicle make an illegal turn and pulled it over.
He gets Suff's driving license, which is out of date. The vehicle registration is out of date. So he then starts to take a vague look in the van, where he discovers, among other things, a fishing knife with what looks like blood on it, not to mention all kinds of other stuff. The traffic cop knows what the police sketch of the possible serial killer is, and the stuff looks, well, really quite like it. So now he calls for backup.
The phone call came, and I asked the officer to tell me what the driver's side front tire was. And he looked down and he told me. And I had a chart of exactly what tire was in what position on the vehicle. I then asked him to go to the passenger side rear vehicle and tell me what the tire brand was. When he did that, I said, freeze the scene.
Now, Suff is taken into custody, and the interrogation begins.
Early in the morning, I got a phone call from my partner. He goes, Bob, we got him. I said, what do you have? He goes, we got him. He's in custody. And I couldn't believe it. I got goosebumps. I mean, it's one of those feelings that I'm not sure what you can equate it to, but it was just enormous.
Detective Keir Sheffield confronted Suff with the damning evidence that proved he had been at the Orange Grove.
He goes, yeah, I went out to pick some oranges. On your way to work? Yeah. And as I'm interviewing, he goes, I found a body. I said, oh, you found a body out there in the orange groves? Yeah. He said, I found a body. I asked myself, who in their right mind, finding a body, will go on to work?
Suff then decided to stop talking and never admitted his guilt. But when his apartment was searched, the police found another pair of sneakers that matched shoe prints left at some of the other crime scenes. Most damning of all, the same grey carpet from Suff's van was linked to fibres found on 7 of the bodies, and his DNA matched profiles discovered on 8 of the women.
We even had some cat hair at some of the more recent crime scenes, and we ultimately tied that into the cat Mr. Suff had in his apartment at the time that he was arrested.
On the 25th of March 1995, Bill Suff finally stood trial at the Riverside Hall of Justice and pleaded not guilty to 13 counts of murder. Deputy District Attorney Paul Zellerbach presented the case for the prosecution.
I called 271 witnesses to testify during that trial. We had over 1,000 pieces of evidence. The trial lasted 7 months, and it was a lot of circumstantial evidence.
But on the 19th of July 1995, the jury finally delivered their verdict, finding him guilty on 12 of the 13 counts. He was also found guilty of the attempted murder of Rhonda Jetmore. On the murder of Sherry Pazer, they were unable to make a unanimous decision, despite Suff's semen being found inside her. The water from the sprinklers at the garden where she was found had potentially destroyed vital evidence. On the 10th of October 1995, Bill Suff was sentenced to death. Despite a successful result, Detective Keir Sheffield, who'd been close to some of the victims, couldn't help but feel a sense of unease. She firmly believed that Suff was guilty of Shelley's murder too.
That's the one case that the jury hung on. And they hung on it because she had 2 deposits of semen. I was hugging Sheree Pacer's grandmother, and I whispered in her ear, "You and I know you did this. You heard all the physical evidence. So let your mind be rest assured and let your heart be at ease, because he's going to die for all the others, and he'll die for her too."
Suff remains on death row at San Quentin State Prison in California.
I firmly believe he's going to hell. There's too much dark in him. He had a look in his eyes that just, it was so scary. It was an evil look. I'm basically the one that got away.